The latest unemployment figures show that nearly 3 in 4 young people, they just do not have jobs. They don't have jobs, or they've simply given up looking for work. Now, as the country commemorates Youth Day, some young people believe that government is not doing enough. Just recently, the community in a poor village of Kwahlati in KwaZulu-Natal say they're thankful for the latest discovery in their area. Residents there believing that what they've discovered is diamonds. Are they not? That answer will be made known, I guess, with time, as the people who went down there to investigate what exactly has been the find will bring their results, I guess, in the near future. Well, paying attention to the issue of unemployment is one particular theme that is going to probably dominate this discussion with the ANC's head of economic transformation, Enoch Godongwana, who talks to us now via the virtual platform. Mr. Godongwana, thank you very much for making time to talk to us. 2 significant issues that perhaps dominate the news agenda, at least this week, is the so-called diamond rush in the area of Kwahlati in Ladysmith. You juxtapose that with the death of the miners, or should we say the zamazamas. These are people who do digging illegally, so trying to eke out a living, and this happened in Orkney this week. That news coming out just yesterday. Talk to us, Mr. Godongwana, about what your framing is when you cast your mind as at these 2 significant events. What does that tell you about the ANC government's progress in trying to eradicate unemployment?
Look, the progress in unemployment has always been interrupted by a number of events. But I'm not trying to be defensive here, because we've had low growth for a number of years. And that growth has been exacerbated by the coronavirus, which on lockdown and other things, which on its own has wiped up about more than 1 million jobs, half of which were lost in Gauteng. 508,000 were lost in the Gauteng province. So there would therefore be desperate attempts by people to try and find different ways of eking out a living. That is understandable. The key question is what is to be done. The President today will make some of the measures that government will take to deal with this question, particularly with youth unemployment. Await the outcome of those announcements. But in general, what we need, in my view, to be talking about is it's a bit of a consensus between government, business, and labor on what are the key critical trade-offs between these 3 stakeholders, which will help us to achieve the desired outcomes. It cannot succeed purely on the basis that government will deliver everything without the support of these 2 stakeholders.
If you look back at the pieces of legislation, or should we say, as you would say in the ANC, if you look at the economic policy or policies that have been pursued since 1994, is there one particular era that you can point to where you'll say that that economic policy trajectory pursued at that time contributed significantly to the reduction of youth unemployment, in particular, seeing that we are today remembering the youth of 1976, but also looking ahead at some of the issues that affect young people today?
Let me just say, looking at the literature which reviews government performance, critical issues that stand out are those of implementation. For instance, The National Planning Commission has recently done a review of the performance of government in relation to the targets of the NDP, and it comes to the same conclusion that the difficulty has been at the level of implementation than a policy question. The Bureau for Economic Research has done a similar thing in analyzing the NDP, and it comes to the conclusion that your fundamental problem is implementation. Recently, two academics, Mariana Mazzucato and Mzuka Sikobo, published a document on state capabilities, on what they call building state capabilities. Same document in its abstract start with a position that says the main issue, there's no lack of, it's not a policy issue, there's no lack of policy. The issue is precisely implementation. So we've got to change our outlook towards how can we make government effective in implementing these policies than saying let's review policy. I'm sketching that literature review to point to a direction which I think, in my view, is important, is to what extent are we likely to deal with the state capacity to implement these decisions and policies.
Mr. Godongwana, I'm going to try and steer this conversation in a language that I think we can all understand. And I want to bring it down to the level of the man on the street so that they can understand exactly what we're talking about. If we just use the example of the so-called diamond rush in the area of Gwahlati, that particular scene on its own, does it paint a picture of progress in the country as far as employment creation in the country is concerned? Or does it paint a picture of failure?
I think that relates to an earlier question, which included the Zamazamas. I said, in the context of high unemployment, people would have different ways of picking out a living. And some of them may be disparate measures. And the picture in Gwahlati is a reflection of that disparate attempt to eke out a living. There's no doubt about that. So the key question for us is how do we focus on dealing with this unemployment? And I've said that is going to require a national effort, not only government alone.
How government responds to the situation in Gwahlati, therefore, I'm sure you'll agree, will be watched with a critical eye. What would you say is the best way to handle that particular matter then?
At the moment, government is sending some experts to establish whether indeed what is being discovered there are diamonds. That's the first thing. I think the first thing to do is to cross that hurdle. The second thing then, once that is clarified, assuming that it is indeed diamonds, the next thing that government needs to be talking about, how do you work with those communities in regularizing the mining of those diamonds?
All right, Mr. Godongwana, let's take a short breather. When we return, we're going to talk about other issues related to unemployment, but latest developments that could possibly be positive news, although there is some skepticism. What am I talking about? Well, there is the recent announcement of a strategic equity partner that is going to partner with government in trying to revive SAA. Very good morning to you once again. If you're just joining us, we are in conversation with the ANC's head of economic policy, Enoch Godongwana. On this Youth Day, we thought it appropriate to bring the governing party to talk to us about what they see as successes and perhaps the work that still needs to be done in order to address the issue of unemployment in the country. Mr. Godongwana, when it comes to the issue of unemployment, we have been told time and again by analysts that it is part of why communities such as the one in Diepkloof this morning. We understand that there is a march that is ongoing there as we speak. The understanding is that the community there says there are issues of xenophobia, and linked to that, again, is the issue of the scarce commodities or the scarce economic activity that happens, particularly in township areas, and you often see conflict between locals and foreign nationals who try to set up business. As a governing party, you have been punting what is called the revival of township economies. Is that bearing any fruit?
Reviving township economies is going to be a process. It's not going to be one incident. And that requires proper planning. So you don't simply move in and say, today we're reviving a township. We've got to do proper planning. Among other things is also to deal with those genuine concerns that in some townships you have got foreign nationals who don't even have South African documents, in other words, illegal in the country, who are trading in the townships. It cannot be correct that in any country that you can allow people to trade if they not have permission to be in that country. Those are some of the genuine and legitimate concerns that need to be addressed. It cannot be characterized as xenophobia. In South Africa, we've given permission and permits to a number of foreign nationals where the need arises. So that cannot be termed xenophobia.
Mr. Godongwana, let's turn our attention to the issue of SAA. The Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan, announcing a potential strategic equity partner that is going to partner with government in order to try and revive SAA. But there does seem to be skepticism. If you listen to the SA Cabin Crew Association, that's the union which organizes in that space, they're saying that there's no transparency in this particular deal. Are you confident that this is one deal that is going to revive SAA?
Only let me just draw a distinction between what the ANC does and what the ANC does not do, which will put your question in proper context. The ANC sets out policy parameters. It does not deal with the operational issues of restructuring SAA. The question then that arises, has the ANC dealt with this matter from a policy perspective? The answer is yes. Okay. We've grappled with this question from January 2019 in Kimberley, right through to a final decision where we agreed from a policy perspective that we need a strategic equity partner for SAA. In fact, we dropped even the demands that we wanted a majority. That was our final discussion on this matter. So from that policy perspective and the parameters, the deal meets the criteria. Okay. There's a second criteria, which a more detailed one, which we kind of a detailed operational interference we did, was to say, to the extent that there will be a private operator, we need to continue with the national flag. Broadly, those are the parameters that we set as the ANC. To that extent, the deal met the policy parameters.
What are those parameters, Mr. Godongwana?
And I've just outlined them.
Okay.
The first one was that we need to find a strategic equity partner. The percentages in the last discussion we had were no longer a matter of concern. What we then said, the second parameter was that it should continue to fly the SA flag. Now, to that extent, it meets the deal. Then there are operational issues which belong to government, that of structuring the deal. The questions that are being posed as to whether the process was transparent and so on are operational issues which the minister is better placed to answer.
Your biggest fear?
Look, at the moment, like everybody else, is the question is there's a lot of detail which is still not being clarified. I would assume the reason for that lack of detail is because the minister and the strategic equity partners have said there's still some due diligence to be made. Once that process is through, that will give us a clear picture of what is the value of the business and how much is being paid by the strategic equity partners and so on. All of those details are still not clear at the moment.
Mr. Godongwana, as we wrap this conversation, just this past Sunday, very interesting remarks being made by some of the political analysts who say if you look at the SAA deal in conjunction with the announcement that companies are now going to be allowed to build their own electricity capacity upwards of 100 megawatt, that seems to show a particular direction that the ANC is driving towards, and that is that of privatization. And some are fearing that as much as there has been lots of corruption over the years in government, but when you start privatizing state assets, the private sector is often said to be the people who are the corruptors of government employees when these deals are concerned. Are you not concerned that there probably is going to be much bigger corruption than we see, particularly when you start privatizing state assets?
Let me say there's a distinction between what commentators are saying and the reality. For instance, the issue of embedded generation is a long-standing debate. There was a demand for about 10 megawatts, which was announced by this president in the State of the Nation address. Subsequent to that, people have demanded more megawatts. But let me outline the principle. The principle is that there's agreement amongst everybody in the country that irrespective of the emergency procurement that the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy is doing, there will still be a substantial shortage of electricity between now and 2024. That's the first point. The second point is that to close that gap, there's unanimity on that point, that you will have to use what is called embedded generation. And that is also contained in the integrated resource plan. So what basically was announced was the quantum of was the level of exemption, not that the principle was not agreed long time ago as it was agreed in the integrated resource plan. So that's the first point one wants to make. The second point, the third point one wants to make is that insofar as privatization is concerned, the standing policy position of the ANC is that there's not such a thing as a position of the ANC which has no privatization. The position of the ANC is said to be guided by the balance of evidence. And what has been that balance of evidence in the context of SAA? We've seen SAA gobbling a lot of amount of money from the public purse in an environment when the government is fiscal constrained. Let me just make these policy choices. For instance, in one of these years, we're putting money in SAA. We had serious drought in rural communities which didn't have water. What class choices are we making if we're not putting more money in SAA, not giving people water? So those are choices the government made, and the balance of evidence then suggested that in the context of SAA, that is, on the context of SAA, we needed a strategic equity partner to assist at two levels, to put more funding, and secondly, to bring operational efficiency into the institution. So each institution or state-owned enterprise will be judged on its own based on the balance of evidence.
All right. Mr. Godongwana, final question to you. The management of the economy of this country since, I guess, in recent years, the commentary around it has not been pretty. In fact, some people will say it has been dismal. And that speaks to the record of the ANC government. And some people say the irony cannot be lost on them that the dismal management of the South African economy, you juxtapose it with what happened yesterday, historic images of ANC staffers protesting outside Luthuli House because they have not been paid. It speaks to the lack of economic management, and how can we trust such a party which can easily neglect its own to pull us out of the quagmire that we see today?
I think we're conflating things that do not belong to each other. Let me start with the economy. There's no doubt any honest person in the ANC will tell you that we've had our own weaknesses over the past few years, including corruption, which is being now ventilated in the Zondo Commission. That points to a fundamental weakness, including corruption. Anybody who denies that is definitely not honest. And that kind of conduct has had an impact on how the economy performs.
All right.
Part of the renewal process in the ANC is to deal with that issue head on. That's one issue. Then the second issue of staffing in the ANC is a completely different matter. It's whether the ANC at the moment, given its financial resources, like all other parties were struggling to, is it good to have 11 floors in Sour Street? I don't know whether of people, whether a party can afford that.
All right.
So those are some of the things, a different thing completely from the management of the economy, which is basically an ANC thing of having more stuff than its resources can carry.
All right. Enoch Godongwana, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, we should not conflict those two.
I thank you for your time.